Classical Conversations presents Refining Rhetoric with CEO Robert Bortons, a podcast where faith, business, politics, and classical education meet. Join us as we use the classical tools of rhetoric to seek truth in every arena of life.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Refining Rhetoric, and welcome back to the school year. If you're listening to this upon release, this is going to be our kind of back to school episode, talking about what fathers and what families can do and why a classical education is so important, as well as highlight two of our students who are in the news for just different accomplishments at the end. And so this is an article from our blog at classicalconversations.com talking about Lee's book, My Mom, The Core, exploring the classical model and what that means and how you as a parent can benefit and why you should stay on this path.
So let's dig into the article. The first point in here is about how classical education teaches children how to think. And I'd love to hear, how does this differ from what traditional education is teaching children?
Yeah, so at Classical Conversations, we've pulled together the 15 tools of learning, or the 15 skills that you need to have to learn anything. And of course, we have a worldview, and we've tried to take rich materials that have stood the test of time, typically called the classics, and use these skills on the classics, on the math, on science, on history, geography, where we are providing them the framework to really anything that they see in the future, anything that changes in society, that they have the framework to think about it. And we're not saying necessarily which thing is good or bad or how to think. We're not interpreting original source texts ourselves and then providing that to the student. We're not saying, hey, this is what George Washington thought. We're saying, go read this letter that George Washington wrote and let's evaluate it. Like, what did we know what was going on back then? So that's kind of the difference, is we are going back to original source documents, that we are practicing these 15 skills, that we're developing them, versus reading someone else's interpretation of the facts and taking that as good.
If I'm understanding you correctly, what you're saying is classical education is about frameworking the way that you think about subjects, topics, books, media. And so it's almost like taking the scientific method to something and going and asking questions using, I think, the 15 skills that we call them, to talk about the things in different ways and comparison, understanding how they relate to one another, what their importance is. And so no matter what piece of media you're presented with, whether you go to see a movie or you read a book with your children, you can take the same framework and apply it to that and extend their learning into whatever you're doing as a family. So that's really cool. The second point on here is that classical education provides children with caring mentors. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so with the rise of insurance costs and cost of buildings and proliferation of the internet, everyone's all about internet education. Well, people become like their mentors, that if we are being educated by a box or by a screen, we'll become like that. And of course, we kind of see that. You just go to any big city and watch everyone just staring at the phone as they walk around and try not to get hit by cars or run into each other. And what we want in classical education is those mentors, that we're looking for wise people that we want our children to sit under, that have a worldview that we can see provides harmony. We want them to be, with that person who has matured, not a perfect person by any means, but a person who's matured and is running towards the same things that we want our children to look at: truth, beauty, and goodness. And so if you're bouncing around and you have 6 subjects with 6 teachers, and those teachers change every single year, well, you're not going to really have a mentor that's educating you in that instance. And so you need to have an adult or maybe a group of adults who are committed to your long-term education, your long-term development, that you're sitting under and with all the time. And of course, we saw that with Plato and Socrates. And we've seen that, of course, many of us in our own lives, where maybe as we became mature adults, we sought mentors, or if we're athletes growing up, we've tried to find coaches that we knew were good and could take us to where we wanted to go. And so that's one of the benefits of a classical education compared to a modern education where they're just plug and play, that you can sit a third grader in front of a screen for 8 hours. And as long as the information being presented is accurate or presented in a way that's the worldview that they want their third grader to get, that is just as good as someone who loves that child, educating them on a day-to-day basis.
So, in a traditional school setting, I mean, it's kind of a roll of a dice whether you have a teacher that cares about your student beyond the academics. Um, it's possible that you could have a really, really good teacher mentor relationship there, but you never know. And with class sizes being 20, 30 students, the chances and odds that your teacher will be connecting, that your child's teacher will connect with them on a one-on-one basis and care about them deeply as an individual is astronomically lower than if they were taught by yourself or a peer or a cousin or anyone close to them in their life who has more interaction with them on a daily basis.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. And you hear from people who maybe broke a generational cycle in their family or has achieved a lot about how that they had that one teacher that really mentored them and poured into them. But that is the exception, not the rule in public school, because there's simply 30 students per teacher. It's just not possible. So, I mean, yeah, there's a 3, maybe a 6% chance of a student in that type of institution getting that mentorship. And that's if you've got teachers that are looking to do that. You can just go to TikTok or X or social media and see there's a lot of teachers who are trying to mentor your students in ways that are the antithesis of your worldview. And they're teaching children to be unburdened by their parents' worldview.
It's also interesting to think about how the approach to academics, traditional academics, is very quickly pivoting towards AI. And they want to say that every child should have a hyper specialized tutor that's going to teach them exactly the way that they want to learn, the way that they know to learn, the way that they think. But at the end of the day, it's all zeros and ones. And what relationship does your child have with this hyper specialized tutor that they can walk out to have a conversation with a future employer or a friend?
Yeah, or look somebody in the eyes when they're in a job interview. It doesn't.
So let's move on to point number 3. Classical education prepares children to work to their true potential. What does that mean?
Yeah, so the only way for us to reach our potential is to have the tools and skills laid out in a way that we can progress and we can grow. And so your typical modern education only thinks about one subject in isolation for 1 year, versus a classical education has these 15 ideas, these 15 skills that will benefit a child for their lifetime. And we're spending 12, 13 years really mastering those skills. So, whatever economic changes happen, whatever job skills are needed, whatever changes in the economy, if you have these skills and tools in your tool belt, well, you can be successful no matter what happens. And we can reach whatever God given potential that we have by providing them a classical education.
So now let's move on to point number 4. This circles back to some things you said in the first one, and that is that classical education trains up leaders who participate in the great conversations of history. There's I think a promise in there too. I'd love you to speak into about the leadership aspect.
Yeah, so there's this idea that you are like a combination of the 5 people you're around most. And so one of the things that they teach you to do in anything that you become good at is you model, you follow the lead of people who have done it before. And so this goes back to what I was saying earlier about, are you reading original source text? Are you reading material that has lasted a lifetime and having a conversation around it, or are you reading someone else's interpretation of it? And so, in a classical model, you typically, especially when you get into the middle school and high school ages, you have these things called Socratic circles where you are reading original source documents, um, or reading the classics with other students and a mentor, and you're having a conversation around them, like what was going on in this period, what could they have meant by this, how um, was this thing going on in history, how would that affect their worldview, and just really joining, George Washington, joining Plato, joining Abraham Lincoln, um, joining George Mueller, joining these great minds and saying, and these great faith leaders, and saying, getting in that same conversation that they were having, conversation that has really been going on throughout humanity since creation, understanding what it means to be under the mandate to, take care of the world, to multiply, to flourish, to love our neighbor well. And that's going to make it so that you are a leader because you've already surrounded yourself with those great leaders throughout history.
So why is that helpful to be talking to these old dead people?
Well, a couple things. One, we could see their worldview, the decisions that they made if they documented them, and why we read those original source documents, and see the outcomes, right? We can see the outcomes of, Confederate generals who maybe loved the Lord but had a worldview that had been perverted. Or we see, okay, Karl Marx, right? We'll read Karl Marx in classical conversations. We read these ideas that they have or he had, and then we can see how have been played out, how they played out in communist Russia, how they played out in socialist Germany, how they're playing out today in Venezuela. And when people come now to say, hey, these are good ideas, or these ideas could make the future better, well, we know that these ideas have already been tried in history and have been found wanting, or they've been tried in history and found to provide a more flourishing life for more people. And so, that's important as we become leaders. We have to weigh decisions. Do we go this path or this other path, right? If we've seen what other leaders have made, how they've made those decisions, the framework that they looked at them in, and if we've practiced making those decisions and thinking through it ourselves already, looking at the past, it helps us make better decisions in the future.
So it's interesting because I want to think about the framework of teaching from experience, of looking at these people from the past. Something that I think is interesting, if you think about like driver's ed, the consequences of driver's ed are that if you don't learn how to drive correctly, it's life and death. And so the goal of driver's ed is to make sure that you don't repeat the mistakes and errors of people that don't know how to drive. And so a lot of what the driver's ed in class portion is showing you how people mess up. And so when you go back and you listen to these people that have written about their lives, people that have written about the lives of other leaders, you get to see played out all of these different mistakes all throughout history. And it is the same sort of dire life and death circumstances. And so why wouldn't you want to go and learn from them? Why would you want to just take a cursory glance, know about them a couple of facts, and move on as if it doesn't impart anything into your life?
Yeah, that's what the modern education does, and why so many people either don't like history, don't care about geography, is because they've just been given a surface level view, and that's not something that's going to interest the mind at all. And so we can see just the outcomes that depression, gender issues, all of these things that have come about this modern education system, and how much it's harming our young people. And so as dads especially, who need to protect and provide, we need to protect our kids from that modern education system that is just going to destroy their soul, and really do whatever we can to give them a classical education that can help them you know learn how to think, be with people that love them, reach their true potential, and develop into leaders.
If I can, I'd like to go back to something you said at the beginning of this section. You said you are the average of the 5 people you associate closest to, your 5 closest friends, 5 people in your mentors in your life. I heard a crazy stat the other day, something like 15,547 hours of your child's life, the average American child's life, will be spent in a public school. And that's 15,500 hours of that child's life that's going to be spent being closer to peers than any teacher, than any family member, whether parent or sibling. That's 15,000 hours that people willingly give up to mold their child into something different than what they want them to be.
Homeschoolers, we get, over 1,000 hours back with our kids every single year. And, as I mentioned earlier, with those teachers and the teacher turnover and the changes every single year, there's no surprise that we have bullying, that we have cliques, that we have gangs, because these students, as they grow up, the only people that are there for them every single year are their peers, because their peers, continue to, age with them. And since our schools are process you by date of birth, that's how you move up. And so it's no surprise that you have these issues when you've got people who are no smarter than you becoming your primary mentors in some form or fashion. And we just see those disastrous consequences of that, where we have, now we have to have 26-year-olds on our parents' insurance because, they haven't matured fast enough.
So, but what about the socialization? Robert?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Chris. I've got 2 CC students I wanted to highlight. One from Tulsa, Sophie Rose. She recently graduated from Classical Conversations, and she won an all-expense-paid trip and the opportunity to perform at the Jimmy's Awards, which I guess is like the Tony Awards, but for high schoolers, in New York City. And so she got to compete against 98 other students from the United States. So it sounds like she had plenty of socialization. I'm not exactly sure how it went. It doesn't sound like she got to perform at the Jimmy Awards themselves, but she did win a $2,500 scholarship just for the work that she did in this competition. And so, congratulations to Sophie Rose and her family, and just shows that, homeschoolers are being socialized. And our younger students learned a little bit about coloring and drawing through oils. And we actually had a student, Olivia Vanover in Shelbyville. She created a horse show poster that the Chamber of Commerce has been putting up all over town. And she is a 12-year-old classical conversation student. And so really cool just to see these students, growing up, being part of their community, winning awards. And really, to all our listeners, if you're in classical conversations or you're homeschooling and a local homeschooler or a local CC student who's been in the news for something cool, we would love to highlight them on a future show. Feel free to send us those articles. And CC students are impacting the world, impacting their community, making it a more enjoyable place to live, and of course, fulfilling our mission to know God and to make him known. So welcome back to school, everyone. I hope you have a great semester. Parents, make sure you're listening to our podcast every week to be encouraged, to see how classical education can be used as adults, to see the world around us as we interview more and more great thought leaders, people with a strong worldview that we would love to mentor our own kids. So until next time, share this episode with a friend and be sure to subscribe. And would love to hear your comments on our reels on Instagram. So until next time, God bless. Hey everyone, I want to briefly interrupt this program to tell you about one of our newest Copper Lodge Library releases, Pride and Prejudice. It is a resource that our families read in the Challenge program. Our Classical Conversations multimedia company has produced this new Copper Lodge edition of this beloved, beautiful book that so many of us love and enjoy. Me not being one of those as a teenage male, not my favorite one that my mom required me to read, but as an adult, I definitely appreciate the story much more. And it's a beloved classic novel. And the wonderful thing about the Copper Lodge Library books is it has footnotes that include, definitions, pronunciations, historical context, and really just helps bring the story to life, as well as wide margins so that students can take notes and really have that conversation with the author. And I bet I would have enjoyed these books much more as a teenage male had I had these details provided for me in the books that I was reading. So students will be discussing Pride and Prejudice inside of our Classical Conversations communities. And of course, for those who might not be in CC, it's a wonderful book that you should include in every curriculum. So you can learn more about the Copper Lodge Library series at copperlodgelibrary.com and go to classicalconversationsbooks.com to purchase one today. Now back to the show.
Welcome to today's episode of Classical Crypto with Will. I'm so glad you're here. We have 3 points today that I want to talk through. First, I want to start with Robert Kennedy Jr. Now, I was a little bit shocked. I shouldn't be, knowing a little bit about him, but he is a big cryptocurrency advocate. And he sees Bitcoin because it has value. It's real. It's trackable. It has a base currency that cannot grow, right? As a fixed supply. That's what that's called. He declared this last week. He said, hey, if I'm elected now or in the future, I have a plan to buy 4 million Bitcoin. Yes, you heard that right. That is an astronomical amount of Bitcoin. That would equate to around $270 billion, which if that was sitting in the US Treasury, that would be seen as a reserve currency, something to back the Fed, to help the government, to help the United States have some stability with whatever currency we're working with at the time, whether it's dollars or a digital dollar or something else. But that was big. That that definitely made headlines and made a lot of people think. Now, Trump spoke just a couple days ago, and he also is very interested in bringing the Bitcoin hash and kind of owning the miners and making sure that U.S. is a big producer of Bitcoin. He's been more focused on that, but he's alluded to the fact that he would also like to see Bitcoin purchased by the U.S. government and held as a reserve currency for stability. So it's really interesting to see both of those candidates really barring down on that narrative and really making people believe that they are seeing the light, that there is value here, and that this could be a stable asset in a global economy that definitely in the last year or two has proven to be fairly unstable, definitely up and down. So that's just very interesting to see that narrative as it plays out. Final point is the Ethereum ETF went live this last week. Following the course of the Bitcoin ETF, the price of Ethereum dipped from almost $3,600 down to $3,000. So it lost 15% of its value overnight, which just blows my mind because most people, including myself, thought when these ETFs were approved that the price would just start soaring because the big funds, would start buying that asset class. But what's happened is the opposite, is that they've definitely tanked. And I believe that's retail selling into the news, like all excited. And then the price doesn't take off. They sell, it dips a little bit. And then if Ethereum follows the path of the Bitcoin ETF, this dip, we're already swinging back from the dip. And then 2 weeks after the Bitcoin ETF dipped, it took off and started soaring. So that's what I'm expecting for Ethereum over the next couple of weeks, is to gain some ground, find its footing, and then the price discovery should really happen. It should take off. So anyways, keeping you up to date in the world of crypto. Thank you so much for listening today. Have a great day, great week, and keep researching cryptocurrency. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Refining Rhetoric with Robert Bortons. Want more? Make sure to subscribe so you won't miss an episode. You can also follow us on social media to continue the conversation. and visit classicalconversations.com/rhetoric to find out how you can join a local homeschool community.